Hello everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, last panel of the day. And of course, we are very honored to have with us giants in the space, from standard bodies, ratings agencies, private sector, and of course UNFCCC. Now many say 2023 was a year of reckoning for the carbon markets. There was a lot of blowback around the quality of demand and supply. Prices have dipped across segments, all segments. And of course, at COP28 last year, Article 6, we could not agree on the rules for Article 6. And yet, we saw some bright sparks. End of 2023, we saw record retirements in carbon credits, and that continued in the first quarter of this year. We saw support for the voluntary carbon markets rallied also at COP28. And today, we are seeing announcements by initiatives like ICVCM and VCMI on new initiatives around supply and demand integrity. So together with us today, we've got an esteemed panel. And maybe I'd like to start with Robin from Verra. If you could share with the audience today, what are some of the steps that Verra has taken on the evolution of the carbon markets and the new era for Verra? And where are you today since the announcement at New York Climate Week last year?
Thank you very much, Anshari, for that, for the introduction, for the opportunity to be here, everyone, and fellow panelists. Certainly, I would agree with you that the year 2023 was certainly a transitional year for carbon markets, voluntary carbon markets, and some might even say a difficult one for the reasons that you specified. It was also obviously a very transitional year for Verra itself, with our founding CEO's departure, as well as sort of new leadership and so forth. That being said, I think it's also very true to say that at Verra, certainly from our perspective, this reflects in many ways, I think, a natural evolution of the market, and in many ways a positive one, in the sense that this is a market moving from really the margins to the mainstream, and with that, the growing pains that come with that. So certainly we did launch the new era for Verra, and in doing that, it was really intended to represent that sort of bold transformation that I think the market required, and that Verra requires as well. Because we do recognize that, yes, we did have a fundamental role in helping the market get from where it was to where it had been, to where it was, whether that's through innovations particularly in forest carbon and otherwise, which just simply wasn't something that was being touched through Kyoto, for instance. But that in order to get from where it was to where it needed to be next, further steps, frankly, a real evolution, if not revolution, was necessary. And that's why we did launch the new era for Verra. That had three components: operational excellence, program integrity and impact, and accountability. In terms of each of those, I think it represents, under the leadership of Judith Simon, our new president, interim CEO, very much a new way of approaching how it is that we engage with the market and what our priorities are. In terms of that first prong, operational excellence, these are things such as really a full-scale digitalization of what it is that we do. This was an analog program for a digital world, and we knew that it was an anachronism, quite frankly. It's the world of PDFs, it's the world of very slow, cumbersome manual processes. That all needed to change. We've launched a project hub, we've launched a project tracker, we've digitalized the non-permanence risk tool. There are project submissions that can be digitalized. So there are these initiatives that are underway. We're introducing SLAs for what people can expect in terms of responsiveness, in terms of review times. We are also introducing a new stakeholder support team, as well as a new oversight for VVB regulation and quality assurance. So these are all sort of initiatives that we have launched. They are at varying stages of completion in terms of that operational excellence piece. The second one, program integrity and impact. This is one where I think it's really, we've set out our schedule for reviewing the methodologies that we have. Obviously, the new RED AUD methodology has been released. We're currently in the process of gathering that activity data from jurisdictions. This is not a small task, but it's one that it's requiring a lot of organizational focus and attention through key hires as well around the world, as well as a lot of sort of engagement with governments in that sense. We've launched an independent research initiative with the Climate Change Action Plan, Climate Change Action Group. And there are various other initiatives that are underway, basically to look at the methodologies and really to interrogate each stage of the project review process in order to make sure that we're providing that sort of baseline level of integrity. Finally, on accountability, this is also something that we realize needs to be enhanced. This is not a market that operates, even if it ever did, but certainly no longer in a vacuum. It is one that absolutely does require an enhanced appreciation, engagement with stakeholders, whether those are indigenous peoples and local communities, and what does that mean for safeguards, benefit sharing, and so forth, FPIC and so forth. It also means increased alignment with what governments are doing, and so we've seen whether it's Article 6 labels, which have been resulting in issuances of VCUs, whether it's developments in Chile and elsewhere. Certainly it's a real mainstreaming. The work is not done. I also appreciate a new era for Verra can't last for forever, and at some point it has to be the next era for Verra, but it is something that we've launched and that we are working on and can point to several real deliverables to date.
It is a nice ring to it, new era for Verra. So look forward to the next stage. Maybe I'll turn to Hugh for gold standard. What are the plans? How are you moving towards the new evolution of the carbon market? Carbon market is 2.0.
Yeah.
Maybe you could share a bit more around your partnerships around Article 6 and what you're doing in that space.
Yeah.
And we'll circle back around Article 6 also later.
Great. And it took me a while to get a new, if you say it in English, it's a new era for Verra, which doesn't make the same ring. So I had to go into American, and then I got it at the end. But just to start by reflecting back on 2023, it's a really interesting year where we sit in gold standard. So it was a year of record issuances under gold standard. Our issuances went up by 30% under the standard. Our retirements went up. We had more projects than ever before coming into our pipeline as well. So some of the fundamentals of what we see look positive, and that's carried on into 2024 as well. Issuances are already half of the entire year of 2022 in the first 3 months of gold standard. Retirements are up higher than they've ever been before in the first quarter. So some of the figures look good, but we know at the same time for our project developers, for buyers, there is uncertainty which clouds all of this. And that's the same whether you sit in gold standard, Verra, wherever you sit. And so coming into 2024, we in gold standard are really looking to build on work which we've done in the past to secure the fundamentals of what we do, to expand opportunity under gold standard through new methodologies, through new forms of requirement, and then to make sure that we're getting the basics right in customer support, in digitization, as Robin shared earlier as well, to make the process of working under gold standard the gold standard of process, as well as being the gold standard in terms of quality and integrity of our work. And so that's really some of the fundamentals that we're looking to build. We in gold standard have been I just wanted to reflect on one of the things that was said on the first panel by Chris Leeds when he was talking about the VCM, and it doesn't make sense to talk about the VCM. This is really how we've seen things in gold standard for a few years now. So we look at ourselves going forward as a standard which serves multiple purposes. We have one high quality standard that serves the voluntary carbon market, and that's a market that we wish to build in and grow in over the coming years, but increasingly supporting compliance markets and supporting use under Article 6 as well. And so if you look at the end of last year, we had our first authorizations of gold standard credits under Article 6. We hope that that builds through this year. We hope that we do receive CORSIA full approval this year as well as the ICVCM approval that we've already received. And so we hope that in gold standard, we build the fundamentals to support a growing voluntary carbon market, but also new and exciting market opportunities outside of that as well.
Robin earlier talked about digitalization.
Yeah.
What is gold standard doing on that front? Could you share a bit more around that?
So, we're in the same position as Verra right now, where processes under gold standard are quite PDF driven. And so we are looking across the full spectrum of what we do in gold standard. Right now we have a consultancy which is taking place to help us to plan our digital strategy for the next few years. And that's looking at digital MRV, how that then plugs into digital workflow programs for gold standard based around a digital standard, digital methodologies, through to how many different actors can connect with our registry. And we're right at the start now in that we're in quite a primitive form. And we feel that the work which we need to do over the next few years could open up many different things. It can make it easier for project developers to access our standard. We have a request for proposals out right now for work looking at how artificial intelligence can reduce some of the barriers for project developers looking to use our standard. But then also there's a lot of data which we hold in our standard which can help many different forms of actors. It can help investors to understand risk in projects. It can help buyers. It can help project developers. And we're looking at how that can be brought out to support a growing market as well.
Interesting you pointed out AI, and I think maybe it's worth looking at how AI could possibly be the next nexus on how the carbon markets evolve and help to improve integrity or transparency. But I'll turn to Suzanne as the Chief Impact Officer of Salesforce. You've been through this. What are your observations on the demand side? We've seen demand dipped in the past year. What does it take for demand to pick up, and what are the incentives for companies to buy and invest in carbon market projects? Noting what Chris also mentioned in the opening panel, voluntary carbon market is all about companies doing more today, right? How do we incentivize that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a bizarre year in the corporate sector, but I represent a company that's based in California, and we're in this weird moment of time where there's a big anti-ESG woke backlash in the United States. Salesforce had 5 activist investors in our stock a year ago, one of which who was running for president on an anti-woke agenda, which was a fun letter to respond to. So we're just in a moment of time where I think corporates, many of my peers, are kind of in a fear moment. You've all heard of this new term of green hushing. And there's been many, many articles that have, in the media about, project developers sort of that have gone wrong, and, corporations sort of being called to the mat for supporting hunting lodges or, protected places that weren't necessarily adding, to the carbon stock that we needed. So I think corporates in general, particularly in the United States, are in this moment of sort of fear. I think that is changing. I hope that's changing. We're a proud purchaser of carbon offsets. We also have an aggressive emissions reduction target as well. So on the demand side, I seem to think that, there's still the purchasing happening, but there is a high amount of need for transparency in the process. So I'm really pleased to hear that Gold Standard and Verra are really kind of looking at the transparency, the quality control issues. I'm not a carbon market expert, so I know a little bit about software. And so I need to be able to trust the projects that I buy from. And one of the things that we're doing in the future, which is a little bit different than how we've been purchasing in the past, is through more fund structures. And those structures, we hope, will sort of de-risk the portfolio, in a way that, we don't have the expertise to sort of audit these projects on a daily basis. We did recently hire a consultant to audit our tree program. In addition to our carbon offset program, we've made a commitment to conserve, restore, or plant 100 million trees. We're about halfway there. It was a really interesting findings, and actually not surprising in the fact that we'd lost about 15% of what we thought. But good to know, largely mangroves. This is nature. We'd have to now, do the math so that we're actually purchasing about 15% more than the original goal. So I think people in the corporate sector are hushed, they're worried. We continue to be fairly vocal about our programs. I think that the media is doing a disservice to this market in a lot of ways. I think that they're, calling out the 10% of projects that don't work, but no one's talking about the 90% of projects that have had massive impact, especially with people. So we look at our programs with both a climate justice lens, so social co-benefits are very important to us, And again, we're really looking at sort of de-risking the portfolio, creating this level of transparency. Love working with Calix and Severa and some of the raters that have come to sort of look at quality control. But I actually think this moment, I think a year from now, we're going to come out with a lot more standard methodology, more quality, and that's going to be a very good thing.
Indeed. You talked about trust, and no one better to talk about trust in projects than Duncan here, right? So Duncan, maybe you could share a bit more. That studies have been done, and they've actually shown the quality of projects today have actually improved, right? What are your thoughts around this? Second question, and it's a bit hard-hitting. We are going to expect meta standards like ICVCM, COSIA defining what is of good quality. So what then will be the role of ratings agencies like Calix? Will buyers just look at what is minimally and cheapest available that's eligible in all these meta standards?
Thanks, Anshari, and thanks, GenZero, for a fantastic day and thought-provoking conversation. And if you ask a hard question, you should expect a hard answer. But the first piece of the question, are we seeing integrity trending up? Are we seeing quality trending up? Data in carbon markets is notoriously difficult to come by, and I think it would be dangerous to draw many conclusions from a couple of months of data analysis, but I do think there is cause for optimism. Yeah? And why do I think there's cause for optimism is that we are starting to see that integrity as a parameter for choice for carbon credits is starting to seep through into price discovery. And that's what you would want in a market that functions well, that functions better, that integrity, the quality of the credit, is actually playing a bigger role in setting the price of that credit. And what I thereby mean is that really that if you are looking at a data-based, evidence-based analysis of the credit, that are those credits that rate higher starting to fetch higher prices? And we are seeing that. It's not quite so that you can run high R-squared analyses on this yet, but we're seeing anecdotally that those credits that we and some of our peers in this industry are rating higher are fetching higher prices. In 2022, we coined this term of ugly ducklings of the carbon market. These are some project types that in the past didn't really get a lot of attention. Yeah, everybody's been looking at a lot of forest projects, but we also rate things like credits from methane capture on landfill projects, credits from nitrous oxide abatement. And these credits have been around for a while, and actually when you analyze them, some of those are actually pretty high integrity. And in a relative price terms, they have done really well in 2023. Yeah? When I talk to some of the developers who develop those kinds of projects, they're all gone. These projects are fully sold out. So I think that, Anshari, is a cause for optimism in terms of is integrity creeping up. Now your second question, which was the hard one, I think, which is the emergence of industry-wide quality labels and an infrastructure around that leading to a reduced need for the carbon credit ratings industry, which in itself isn't that old. And I think, first of all, it's great that we're having a conversation like this. Imagine that we are now able to talk about an ecosystem in the carbon market that has all these different players, that you're actually challenging, hey, do we need all these players? So I think this is massive progress. And I also like the challenge you pose. Donna Lee, my co-founder, and I often joke like, hey, if we're no longer needed, great, we'll retire and the market will be the better off for it if quality is guaranteed. But the reality is that the variance of quality in this market is still enormous. Yeah, we at Calix, we've rated more than 500 projects, representing slightly over 50% of the volume of what gets traded in this market. Our rating systems go from A+ at the top end to E at the bottom end, and A+ and A still represent less than 10% of what we have rated so far. So this variance is big. Now I would say that the ICVCM CCPs, the core carbon principles, that label on carbon credits can't come soon enough, in my opinion. I think it would be fantastic for a number of reasons. One is, hopefully it sets a floor, below which people really won't go. Second, I think it'll contribute to confidence in the market, which will be important. And third, I think it'll add to a shared lingo in the market, that people will be able to talk around common factors. Now, at the same time, when I look at what our customers are asking for. It's nice to meet you in person, Suzanne. But what our customers are looking for, they are looking for project level ratings to ensure that what they're buying actually achieved the claims that are being made. The claim that it represents 1 ton, the claim that it makes impact on 1 or more of the UN SDGs. They want assurance at the project level that that's the case. And at the moment, ratings is the only way of getting that. Now, I'll bring one more element into the conversation since you asked me 2 questions, so I get extra time. And I'll allude back to what Peter Bakker said earlier from the WBCSD. He said, we need to manage carbon like we manage money. Well, I'll draw an analog here between bond markets and carbon markets. Yeah, I can't imagine a bond market where the only type of assessment that's available to buyers of bonds is a determination of whether the bond is investment grade or not. And that would be based solely on the sector from which the issuer of the bond emanates. Yeah, that would be a carbon market without ratings. So I think ratings are here to stay. But the bottom line, and I somewhat mind, Anshari, that you posed it as a juxtaposition, is we all should be working to get the whole ecosystem to work well. Yeah, this is about getting this ecosystem to function. And I love being on a panel with Robin. It's not the first time, and I love finally meeting Hugh in person. We are all part of getting this ecosystem to work better.
Ouch. Now let me turn to Perumal, looking very smart and regal at the end. Perumal is the Article 6 lead for UNFCCC, so he's the godfather of Article 6 and also CDM to a certain extent. So he is the guru. Now Perumal, could you share with us what can we expect out of COP29 this year on Article 6? Right. Last year it was such a pity that we couldn't get out rules on Article 6 because we kind of saw support for the voluntary carbon market rallied at COP28 with even MDB's multilateral development banks like World Bank having very strong statements on the need for the carbon market itself. So what are the dynamics in the Article 6 negotiations and what's required to actually get a very positive outcome at COP29 this year?
No, thanks, first of all, to having me here. And you can see that I'm still not moved to analog to digital, still with my book. The old-time carbon market, as you said, that shows the experience of 20 years in the market. No, first and foremost, I think when we came out of Dubai, many felt that it was a failure for Article 6 negotiations, but I don't see it that way. Primarily because that clearly provided a picture on what the major stakeholders as governments, where we talk about, we heard about Article 6 labeling from Hugh, and we are also talking about making compliance level credits from Vera. And then we heard from the rating agencies that they would be happy to see these kind of standards that are available. So it clearly sent a signal that the countries that have to provide that level of an authorization in order for them to be Article 6 compliant are looking for a global benchmark standard which basically provides that confidence into the market, right? And what has taken, it clearly shows that the 2 weeks of conversation in Bonn was not, in Dubai was not the reason. The reason was with the statistics of like 60% of the traded volume in the carbon market in the last year in the voluntary is on removals. And then you would see that the conversation that happened in Dubai has basically thrown out all of us within the carbon market community to look back on what is our major stakeholder as the governments are looking at how the carbon market has to function for removals framework. So that's something that we are working on. It's on a multitude of reasons. Some of them feel that when we talk in terms of removals, particularly on bio sequestration type, it has to be on a particular scale. It cannot be on a scale lower than the national scale. That created some kind of issue. Then the type. There are both supporters and opposers for different types of removal types. And some of them, when you try to develop a global standard, and particularly from you, and you know that not even that we qualified anything, we just simply said from a consolidation of a public input, we talked about one technology and we got 400 submissions accusing us trying to be aligned with one type of a removal technology and against other. So within the global negotiation process, identifying the right level of principles that applies, that is technology agnostic and scale agnostic, was an issue. The third, whether you like it or not, even though we are talking in terms of a global carbon market within the UN context, oftentimes there is an influx of what's happening in the domestic legislation can have a larger impact. And particularly in 2023, there's a lot of frameworks are emerging, or domestic legislations related to removals are being generated in different countries. And they see the negotiations that happened, or in the room, the negotiations in Article 6 was somewhat not fully palatable to them in their own domestic legislation. So how do you look at the standards that can capture everybody's imagination without leaving anyone behind? That's the whole UN, right? Because the global carbon market that's been run by United Nations has to be applicable to everyone. So if you think that if you develop a standard which has to be applicable to 196 plus countries while not leaving anyone behind at any scale, any technology, is the challenge. And the lessons that we have learned is that you need to have a standard that also need to closely look at the different domestic legislations that are going on. And when I said that, are we seeing this as a failure? No, because you have seen that if you are following Article 6, because when we say generally Article 6, it has two elements. One is that two countries can cooperate, and then they have a transparency framework under the transparency and accountability framework under the UN, where the countries report to the UN, and it goes through the international review and reporting processes. The other one is the complete centralized mechanism which produces the standards. And this has an oversight of a global body, constituted body that was nominated by 196 countries, elected by them, selected by them. They have said, despite what has happened in Dubai, that they are developing tools and guidelines this year, particularly addressing the comments and the inputs that were received in Dubai. That's what it's happening. While we are talking, there are close to about 74 countries have put forward their domestic institutions to deal with the centralized carbon market that will be run by the UNFCCC. While we are talking, like, it's a primary requirement, because we heard in the last two panels that how do you scale up, right? And then the last panel ended up by saying that we need to have a specific regulatory framework. Whether Article 6 gets benefit, because as a UN, it's not a profit-making body nor a private sector who wanted to make business, right? It's UN entity is there to provide the global benchmark for you to compare with and excel. If I have to talk about my key performance indicator from United Nations, it's about how much we have influenced the other influencers in the market, be it Vera, be it Gold Standard, or the remaining. Like we talk about the multilateral system, why we are setting up is to create that global benchmark, and that's what we are trying. And making a global benchmark that can be a reference to everyone is a Herculean task. So that will take time, and that will provide that level of comfort for the market. And for that regulatory framework, you need to have countries to identify, and that's where I think we are talking about where does the big money come from? Where does that systemic innovation can happen is when your regulations clearly clarify that what they are looking at to engage in carbon finance. And that's the first and primary requirement for a carbon market to function within the UN framework. And as we speak today, 2 countries have completed that step and provided that inputs to us. And we are providing capacity building in countries to create that framework so that it can send the right signal to the private sector on the areas to focus on, the areas to invest on, and whereby they can provide the necessary clarity. And having said that, I started with the paper and not in digital, but I also wanted to talk about the digital things. So for sure that today the submissions on projects, like if you have seen most of the submissions, even the countries that have submitted their documentations are through digital workflows. We no longer use PDFs. the Secretariat with its limited resources and not having a cushion of AI yet, we still have a digitalized framework. As we speak today, we have opened the channel for independent verification and validation bodies to be accredited under the United Nations. And we have received an expression of interest from 50 VVBs as we are today. The applications have started from April 1st. That's continuing to happen. The supervisory body, I do not know if anywhere Ben from Singapore is here in the room. He's part of the supervisory body. They will be adopting the sustainable development standards for the centralized market system, and also the appeals and grievance processes. Like I think we heard from Robin in terms of accountability and looking at the diversified stakeholders, including that of the indigenous community. So the appeals and grievance process has been mandated by countries in Glasgow in 2021 for Article 6 to take into account. So we will be having the standards related to appeals and grievances. And then within the initial track of Article 6.2, which I said where countries cooperate, we would be having the first centralized review of the cooperation between Switzerland, Ghana, Thailand, Vanuatu, and the latest cooperation that Guyana has put forward for CORSIA application will be centrally reviewed under the Article 6 review in the third quarter of the year. The third quarter of the year, again, Article 6 will be ready to have its infrastructure to issue the Article 6.4 units, which can come to the markets. So if you have been listening and reading papers of Article 6 was a failure, it will take another 3 years. I hope that what I said now will give you the assurance that we may look laggards, but not we are really. We wanted to set the tone in the market, and we are in the phase of implementation. And while we talk about implementation, that's where it becomes very important. We ask, how do you scale up? And I think there are a lot of financiers and investors are here, investment firms and banks, whomsoever I could see with my magnifying glasses as a negotiating support person, sitting on the podium, you can read all the 196 countries what they are thinking. Anjari was part of my co-facilitator in 2018. So that's a testament. So I'm sure that how in a financial market that you are looking at having a proper SWIFT code for you to have a secure financial transaction, all the concerns that we heard from afternoon 2 o'clock in terms of how do you scale carbon finance, make technology innovation. I also have a SWIFT code for a carbon market. So the first and foremost is a supplementarity, right? How do you make the actions that you undertake are supplemental to the actions that would have otherwise have happened? I think that's primarily important to unlock many things that we are talking about. I will leave the W because I think I have quite a number of friends like Renault and others here in this room who knows that one of the bigger criticisms of the CDM was about regional distribution. And I'm sure that with Singapore making its own effort to reach out to many global south countries to participate are countries which have not much benefited from the carbon markets, etc. So if you want it to be really true, it cannot be a compartmentalized few countries moving forward. We need everyone to be together, which I would say the worldwide SW for the SWIFT. And I will talk in terms of integrity. We are talking about integrity matters, which also was a summary from Mark. I think it was from Mark, or Chris Leeds. One of them talked about integrity matters, which also has been said by my two fellow colleagues. Both of them, Hugh and Robin, talked about it, the integrity, which involves many things, MRV's digital framework, transparency, etc. The fourth primary things is like, I think somebody raised a question about why carbon markets are not taking up as similar to that of a global financial market is because of the fungibility, right? Like you have multiple standards, delivering multiple products, providing multiple results for the same socioeconomic situation. And that's where I think the Article 6 delivery can set a benchmark of a global benchmark. And that will provide some level of fungibility, and people are going to do much better than that. And that's what we expect. So that fungibility is the fourth factor of the SWIFT. And the last one was the transparency, the T. So the transparency includes the review and the reporting provisions that we have within the UNFCCC. In the end, even if you are compliant within Article 6, it has to go through the international reporting and review process before it can be complied and confidently raised as it is not being double counted. So I would end with that Swift code of SWIT of supplementarity, worldwide integrity, fungibility, and transparency to unlock carbon finance.
Very good. We also need to move swiftly to get the decisions and rules agreed, because everyone is waiting. And I think this mantra that we've heard many times in the negotiations, no deal is better than a bad deal, I think that has to change, because I think that's just a rhetoric. So we need to move fast on that. But I wanted to touch on the I, integrity. And there seems to be an illusion that perhaps Article 6 projects or projects with corresponding adjustments might be better than projects without corresponding adjustments. Right? And I open this up to the entire panel for any response. What's your view? Is that necessarily the case? Maybe from the voluntary carbon market side, are corporates looking for credits with corresponding adjustments, not just for compliance, but just because they see it as a benchmark for quality?
Okay.
Hugh?
Yeah, I mean, for us, this comes back to the point I made earlier. We see ourselves going forward as one standard which can be used for multiple purposes. And if a project has a letter of authorization under Article 6, we don't treat it differently. We don't give it a higher standard of requirements and a lower standard for the voluntary market. Projects have to meet the same standard, whether they are Article 6 authorized, whether they are not. And so the quality of the standard, the quality of the project, in terms of our rules, stays the same whether or not the project has a letter of authorization. I think, and I kind of hope, that you do see different types of activities which are authorized under Article 6 and which aren't. Countries should be thinking about what fits within their NDC, what represents high-hanging fruit. And so I'm not saying that projects will be identical under Article 6 or not, but for us, it matters just as much what the quality level is, whether a project is an Article 6 one or whether it's not.
Great.
I mean, from our organization's vantage point, it would be our view that a corresponding adjustment is not in and of itself an indicator of quality. Either way, frankly, it is an indicator that the credit can be, frankly, used for a Paris accounting or a Paris derived accounting reason. But in and of itself, it doesn't actually go to the quality of the credit. There may be compelling reasons, for instance, why a credit may be something that is purchased and counts as a contribution towards a host country, as a form of quantifying the flows of finance, technology capacity that are going there from the global north to the global south. And so we don't necessarily see it as an indicator of quality. By the same token, we certainly want to enable it, which is why we have a process by which corresponding adjustments can be applied more accurately, labels can be applied that would indicate, make it able to be correspondingly adjusted. But in and of itself, it's quite divorced from quality in our view.
Yeah, I think. Well, first of all, I'll just say that it's been so nice to hear the workflow is coming up, and we're getting rid of embedded PDFs and spreadsheets and all that human error can sort of occur in those contexts. And as a technology company, we think this is partly our role. This is our superpower. It's what we know. So as much as we can support any of you in your quest to digitization, just want to offer that as a resource to all of you. And great news, I think it's time. I think it is, in a way, related to the quality control issues, I think, that we have over time. So, this particular question, it's a little irrelevant for us. We're looking at, quality at a macro level. We also think a lot about, I sort of said before, the co-benefits. And we think about it at the community level. I think that's not talked about enough, not represented enough often in forums like this. And, frankly, we have to think largely about the folks on the ground and the benefit that it's bringing in addition to the carbon benefits. So I'm just thrilled that we're in a phase that's requiring an up-leveling as it relates to transparency, as it relates to sort of digital excellence. And I think a lot about AI. That's one thing I've been working on a lot. In fact, I'm equally excited and worried about the potential of AI as it relates to the climate space. But We come at it from a tools perspective. We have a carbon tool, we have a marketplace tool that we are working with some of the largest corporations on the planet, because our view is you can't manage what you can't measure.
Indeed.
So as we think about the kind of maturing in this space, I think bringing technology advances to kind of leapfrog where we are from a quality perspective is really key.
Perumal?
Yeah, I would say I think we all agree that in terms of for what use it is being used, the quality should remain the same, whether it's for you claim for any voluntary compensation or contribution, or for accounting under the Paris, the quality should remain the same, which also brings back to the question of when it comes to integrity, the standard shouldn't be partial to that. Like you should have one standard that it remains irrespective of what use it is being used. I also agree that accounting by itself alone is not sufficient enough to say that it is of higher credibility and integrity. But what is the most important is that every unit that is being generated out of a carbon standard or anything, how much, whether it be it in what scale, whether it's an activity scale, or it is in a programmatic scale, or it is in a sectoral scale, or at a policy level in a national scale, one has to make sure that they are aligned to what has been agreed within the Paris objectives, right? And if we are able to do that, like I know that like working from a project activity level in my first part of the first decade of my life, trying for someone to say that when you do change an energy efficiency equipment in your plant, how do you demonstrate that it is aligned to an 1.5 degree of a country's goals is quite challenging. But waiting for 2025 for every country to provide its updated NDC, where there is a call for everyone to advance. Hopefully that you might have seen by now, there's a new proposal that has been made within the negotiations asking that in order for developing countries to become net zero by earlier, they are calling for developed countries to go net negative before that, right? So the conversations evolve. So if we have to be true to that, every single action that we do have to align with the Paris objectives. So for me, like I think that's the most important. When you talk about integrity, is corresponding adjustments alone is sufficient? I would say no. But what is most important is that every ton that is coming to the market has to align with the Paris objectives of 1.5 degree.
Before you respond, Duncan, if a same project, one has a corresponding adjustment, one without, exactly same methodology, exactly same features, would you rate one better than the other?
No, we wouldn't. I concur with the other panelists that is an accounting label, suitability for something. And I think the living proof is actually Singapore, right? Singapore has, as part of its own Article 6 construct, chosen to establish a whitelist. Mm-hmm. It's still a relatively empty whitelist, and we're hoping that it gets bigger soon. But that is, to me, living proof that not all credits are created equal, even if they are 6.2 eligible.
Mm-hmm. Very clear. Peru, you mentioned about Paris-aligned projects, right, and credits. It's a nice segue to the questions from the audience. And it's a very interesting one and pertinent to the discussion today. With volatility in the voluntary carbon markets today, compounded SBTi drama recently, is there a role for governments to come in with interventions? If so, what should it be? Anyone wants to take a stab at answering this question? Duncan?
Yeah, I'll start. Look, I think voluntary carbon markets, ultimately, I suspect, will, in some way, shape, or form, become more subject to regulation. In some ways, the industry is voluntarily putting some of that infrastructure in place. Yeah, the ICVCM, while it is totally non-governmental, is a framework for all of us to agree to a certain set of norms and standards around quality. And I think, honestly, I would welcome for over time more regulation to come in. And by the way, it is happening. If you see what California is now expecting of its corporate citizens in terms of disclosure. Yeah, we're getting closer and closer to companies having to disclose exactly which carbon credits they're using and why those carbon credits stand up to scrutiny. The SEC has been skirting closer and further, as has the CFTC, around requiring more and more disclosure. I wouldn't be surprised that that is a trend that will continue, and I don't think it's something to be scared of.
Perumal?
No, I think one of the things I think in terms of clarity from the regulatory side from the countries to put forward, either you call it as a white list, positive list, green list or something, because at many times that we say, because I'm jumping in because it's also that Article 6, when you see me, you label me as someone coming from UN, so this guy is the compliance guy, he's of no interest to us. But it's not really that. Article 6 also provides a class of assert category, which is called as a mitigation contribution units. Contribution claims where that's primarily expected to have climate finance flowing into various actors, like where the private sector can also make claims, not necessarily on net zero claims, or you can always have some kind of an impact investment that is being labeled as supporting something towards climate action, not necessarily that. So I think here the government role is to come forward with a clarity in terms of what and what not, and I think which was also Hugh mentioned earlier. And then, because primary reason is that where we are forgetting is that we heard from Peter and others in the first panel that for many of the emissions, that 80% or 60%, like if you look at the whole supply chain, you will find 60% of the emissions are coming from scope 3 emissions. But let's not forget the scope 3 emissions of those in some sectors are the scope 1 emissions of those countries, right? So there are actions that need to be also taken by those countries in order to act. So for that's where I think the government or the regulators coming up with some kind of a list which can provide that clarity is where I think there is an interface.
Yes.
If I may just quickly touch upon the regulatory point. Certainly from our perspective, we would strongly encourage and we would welcome greater regulatory interest within the VCM. When you look at primary markets, I think, and I'll speak here about the United States, CFTC, a stronger role with respect to tackling fraud and market manipulation, I think, can only be beneficial. This is a market that, like any other, can be susceptible to bad actors, and so being able to sort of count on a specialized regulatory agency rather than referring to sort of local law enforcement on a piecemeal basis, I think can only be beneficial. In addition, we know the climate crisis can only be solved if we get off the sidelines the entities that control significant sums of wealth, and these are entities with sort of very frankly low risk tolerances, and they are ones which are probably going to be accessing this market through secondary markets, and that's obviously an area where there's a lot more direct regulatory oversight. And so I think we do need to welcome it. I think that absolutely this is a market that needed this, I don't want to say anarchic, but certainly a sort of more freewheeling basis to grow. But in order to mature, it's going to need to embrace regulation. And from Vera's perspective, we're already thinking of it as a sort of a pre-regulatory state.
Very interesting, because one would think, at least in the previous construct, a voluntary carbon market is all about innovation, and maybe regulations could sometimes stifle innovation, right? But now we are in this space, probably some regulation might actually help. Would like to hear perspectives from also the other panels, and maybe Hugh.
Yeah, I mean, so this is something that we're thinking about a lot at the moment, and we're going to publish on our website within the next few months a public tracker of all regulations which exist globally related to the market. And I think we're at 40 right now. So we're not in a non-regulated market. We're in a market which is increasingly regulated, whether that's on the demand side or whether that's on the supply side, or looking at how transactions take place. And the way that I look at this now is you kind of want regulation to move forward soon, because my sense is if you go forward 10 years, every country which is hosting projects will have regulation in place for the voluntary market. And so if you're operating in a market which doesn't have that yet, you have some risk about what might come forward in the future. What will the tax level be? How will my market be regulated? And so those who move forward now have regulatory clarity for projects which are being invested in. But I think it's also important to say It's not a question of regulation good, no regulation bad. It really depends on what it looks like. And so we had examples last year in Zimbabwe, elsewhere, where there was major disruption by regulation being introduced badly or done badly. And so this has to be done right if it's going to support the market.
Indeed. Suzanne?
Yeah, I think I would just say, we talk a lot about this at the country level. I think regulation is neither good or bad. It really just creates some standards that are desperately needed, and hopefully reduces some of the potential corruption that could occur. I think that innovation, at least what I see, happens at the city and state level in a way that I think is really powerful. So, we talk about it at the country level, at the global level, which is very important, but I still even think, even in the context of standards and regulation, we can still count on and should be counting on innovation at the city and state level, which I think you're much closer to the work at that level, and really can sort of judge it. But we need to have some sort of global standards that holds folks to account.
Thank you. Duncan, any reaction?
No, look, if you take finance, I'll go back to what Peter Bakker said. We have to manage carbon like we manage money. Finance is a heavily regulated industry, not lacking innovation, creativity, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, but in any way, shape, or form. I think sometimes having that structure around you with some boundaries and guardrails is exactly what you need to be super creative. I always think of the example of schools that are known to be, where the kids go and that have really strict rules, etc. It's where the kids have the most fun. Schools where anything can be done, not quite as much fun.
Very funny.
Sorry.
Let's go back. I'm cognizant of the time, but I just want to close this panel with some parting words from the panelists. To go back to the title, will 2024 be a year of redemption for carbon markets? And if so, very quickly, what are the things to look out for? What are the signposts? Perumal? Yes, because we will get Article 6 rules, COP29?
Obviously, yes. But it's, as you know, that it's not with us, it's the party-driven process, that. So the countries have to decide upon that, because I cannot reach back to Bonn if I say that, yes, that Perumal has agreed that UN rules will be done in 2024. No, I think in terms of year of redemption, and I think let's also not forget that this year again, I'm bringing the political space, I think at least close to 54% of the world population is going on elections this time. So in 2024, because I said you asked beginning of one of the reasons for failures, and I said that the influx and the triangularity between what's happening in the domestic legislation versus what's happening in the global negotiation conversation. To me, it's quite certain that since we have not had an outcome back in Dubai, and I think this year for sure that the steps that has been taken is going to be redemption, because by the end of the year you would have at least 13 tools and guidelines that will be available from particularly on the complex area of both methodological guidance. You asked me about Paris-aligned markets. So around that there are about 6 tools and guidances are going to be published, and about 6 tools on the removals where we had all this conversation and failure. So to me, I think that's going to be a positive sign. And you would not be surprised that I'm also thinking that by end of this year we will have a virgin new Article 6.4 activity requesting for registration within the UNFCCC, which will be a redemption for the carbon market, and the confidence that it will bring back in terms of multilateral carbon markets still can play a larger role in setting global benchmarks when it comes to carbon market standards.
Thank you. Let us know if you need some investment into that Article 6.4 project.
Sure.
Very swiftly to the rest of the panelists. Duncan.
Very swiftly, I think 2024 is a year of opportunity rather than redemption. It's an opportunity to show that we collectively as an ecosystem have learned from both what worked as well as what didn't work of Carbon Markets 1.0, and to show that we have the courage and the wherewithal to start afresh with those lessons integrated.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think not to, sort of be a bummer. I don't think it's the year of redemption either. I think it's the year that there's still going to be some shakeout that sort of happens through the remainder of the year. I think next year is the year I think that we're going to begin to see some stabilization. I think this year we have super elections, to your point, in close to 60% of the world. It sort of depends on where you live in terms of how this is going to be regulated at some level. I do think we're over the hump. I still think there needs to be some shakeout before really we start moving again in a sort of high quality, fully trusted, transparent digital way.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Redemption is a very big word, and I do query whether we're quite there yet. But certainly, from our view, is that things are trending positively. But nonetheless, it's going to require a great deal of effort by many in order to be a bit more optimistic.
I'm very bad at predictions, so but I mean, because I think there are many options this year which you can see. So multiple questions for the market. Will the ICVCM, which will I think complete its process over the course of this year, instill confidence amongst buyers in carbon credits in a way that maybe was lacking a bit this year? It's a question mark. We'll see at the end of this year. What will SBTI do now that they've, after the statement last week? That is a very significant impact on the future of the market. What will happen in the many elections across the year, US election, but also what will come out of Indonesian election recently. There's other ones as well which really matter in particular areas, and there's question marks which exist there as well. What will happen in Article 6 negotiations at the end of this year? So GenZero, I think, published a paper on scenarios looking out to 2050. I think there's several scenarios for this coming year as well, some of which point very positively, some of which maybe not so much. And we can't leave that all to choice. Elections we can't control. There's other stuff that I think we can as an ecosystem. And so the work that we can do to bring this to a year which is positive for the market, we should.
Very apt way to close, and thank you for the plug. So thank you everyone for a very good panel, very colorful insights, and we look forward to redeeming carbon markets in 2024, if it's not a year of redemption. So please join me in thanking the panelists.